The rain in Chicago did not fall. It attacked. It slicked the streets of the Loop with a cold, metallic sheen, turning neon signs into watercolor blurs. From the armored quiet of the Rolls-Royce, the city was a silent film of hurried ghosts and hissing tires. Dominic Valerio, known to the shadows as Dante, watched the windshield wipers beat a steady, hypnotic rhythm. They fought a losing battle against the deluge, much like he fought the impulse that had brought him here. He was not a man who ran errands. He was a man who ran the city's unseen arteries. At 32, he had inherited an empire built on steel, concrete, and blood, and had solidified it with a mind that moved faster than the stock ticker and a reputation for quiet finality. His hand-tailored suit felt too stiff, the knot of his silk tie too tight. Beside him on the leather seat, his phone buzzed. Ignored. It would be Rico, his consigliere, frantic that the boss had slipped his security detail. Dante's gaze was fixed on the objective. It was not a warehouse, not a rival's stronghold, not a politician's penthouse. It was a shop, a tiny, impossible sliver of light wedged between a darkened pawnshop and a closed-down deli. The sign, painted in elegant, fading script, read White Petal. For 2 years, they had come, 104 Mondays. A delivery man, always different, would arrive at his corporate office, the legitimate face of the Valerio Consortium. He would carry a simple box. Inside, a bouquet of 12 long-stemmed white roses, thorns meticulously removed, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with simple twine. No card, no note, no sender. The first time, his men had treated it as a threat. They swept the bouquet for toxins, for explosives, for listening devices. It was clean, just flowers. The second time, Rico had called it an insult. White, boss like a surrender. Someone's mocking you. Dante said nothing. He had simply placed them in the crystal vase on his mahogany desk. By the 10th bouquet, it became a ritual, a curiosity. By the 50th, it was a superstition. His organization, men who feared nothing, grew wary of the flowers. They were a question mark in a life that demanded absolutes. White roses, peace, innocence, surrender. In his world, they were all the same. They were liabilities. But to Dante, they were something else. They were the only thing in his life that was not demanded of him, not taken by him, and not offered in fear. They simply arrived. Tonight, after a brutal negotiation that secured his control over the shipping lanes, he had seen the weekly delivery on his desk, the scent of them, clean and green, cut through the staleness of cigar smoke and the faint, coppery smell of anxiety. He had looked at them for a solid hour before making a decision. It could be a trap, Dante, Rico's voice had argued earlier. A setup, the feds, or worse, the Orpheus network. Let my guys handle it. We'll grab the delivery guy. Trace the order. No, Dante had said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. I'll handle this one. He wanted to see the source. He needed to understand the one puzzle he had failed to solve. He stepped out of the Rolls-Royce. The cold rain hit him instantly, plastering dark strands of hair to his forehead. He ignored the chill. His focus locked on the shop window. It was a beacon. While the rest of the street was drowned in gray and black, the White Petal glowed with a warm, golden light. It looked like a photograph from a different, softer era. Through the glass, past the delicate cursive on the window, he saw her. She was turned away from him, working at a heavy wooden table. He clocked the details automatically. Female, late 20s, slender build, dark hair pulled back in a messy knot. She wore a simple gray sweater and an apron stained with green. She moved with a quiet, practiced grace, her hands streaked with pollen and dirt arranging a spray of baby's breath. She was humming, a sound so faint he almost imagined it. She was alone. She was unguarded. She was the antithesis of his entire existence. Dante pushed the impulse down, the one that told him to get back in the car, to let Rico handle it, to let the mystery remain a mystery. He had not built his empire on hesitation. He pushed open the door. A small bell, silver and bright, chimed above his head. The sound was sharp, almost violent, in the profound quiet. She startled, her hands freezing over a bloom. She turned, and the world tilted. It was not just that she was beautiful. She was in a way that hurt to look at directly. It was her eyes. They were blue, but not a simple blue. They were the blue of a deep, sorrowful ocean, and they held an impossible, tragic sadness. She was 27, he guessed, but her eyes looked centuries old. They stared at each other. The city outside, the rain, the distant sirens, it all dissolved. There was only the sound of his own breathing and the overwhelming, suffocating scent of flowers. It was not just roses. It was damp earth and lavender and something sharp and green. It was the smell of life, and it saturated the air, clinging to him, invading his lungs. Isabella Rowan looked at the man who filled her doorway. He was a shadow carved into the shape of a man, dripping rainwater onto her clean wooden floor. His suit was worth more than her entire shop. His face was sharp, intelligent, and brutal, but his eyes were as dark and lost as her own. Time stretched, a minute, a lifetime. Neither of them spoke. She did not ask if he needed help. He did not ask his question. The connection was immediate, terrifying, and absolute. It was not the jolt of attraction. It was the jarring, painful click of two souls recognizing each other, two jagged pieces of a broken thing slamming back into place. Dante looked at her hands, stained with the powder of lilies. He looked at her sad, knowing eyes. He looked at the white roses sitting in a copper bucket near the counter, waiting. He knew, with the certainty that had kept him alive his entire life, he knew this woman, with the sadness of the world in her eyes, was the one sending him flowers. And as he stood there, rooted to the floor by a force he could not name, Dominic Valerio realized he was not ready for the truth. He was not ready to know why. Dante did not ask the question. He merely nodded, a gesture so stiff it felt foreign, and backed out of the shop, the bell chiming his retreat like a warning. He sat in the Rolls-Royce for 10 minutes, the engine humming, the rain hissing, his mind replaying the collision of their eyes. The encounter had left him more unsettled than a boardroom betrayal. By the time he reached his penthouse, Rico was waiting, his face a mask of anxious disapproval. "You slipped us, boss. That neighborhood not smart." Dante loosened his tie, his gaze distant, fixed on the city lights below. "I want a name. The owner of the white petal." "Already running it," Rico said, pulling out his tablet. "Isabella Rowan, 27. Clean record. No, cleaner than clean. No credit cards, no loans. Pays her taxes. Inherited the shop from an aunt. It's a ghost profile." "No one is that clean." Dante turned. "Dig deeper. I want to know where she sleeps, what she eats, who she talks to. I want to know what her father did for a living." "You think she's a plant?" "I think white roses don't just appear for 2 years out of nowhere," Dante said, his voice flat. "Find out who she's working for." The file was on his desk in less than 24 hours. Dante read it under the sterile light of his office. The white roses from Monday sitting in their usual vase, their scent mocking him. The report painted a picture not of a spy, but of a struggle. Isabella Rowan lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery in Little Italy. Her bank account was perpetually near empty, drained by monthly payments to a private palliative care facility. She was paying for her father, Arthur Rowan. Dante's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Detective Arthur Rowan, the man had been a bulldog, a ghost from his father's era, obsessed with the Valerio family. Rowan had spent a decade trying to pin the freightliner explosion at the B dock on Dante's father, long before Dante took over. The case had ruined Rowan's career, but he never let it go. So, the florist was a cop's daughter. This was not a coincidence. This was leverage, a trap. But the story in the file didn't align. Isabella wasn't meeting with agents. She was meeting with nurses. Her only deviation from her routine shop to apartment to care facility was a weekly visit to a church charity for groceries. And then Dante saw the address of her childhood home, a nondescript street in Lincoln Park, a street he knew. His heart, a muscle he'd trained into submission, seized. It was 3 blocks from the alley where his mother, Elena Valerio, had been shot and killed. The memory, walled off for 2 decades, breached his defenses. He wasn't in his high-rise office anymore. He was 12, in his mother's kitchen, the air thick with the smell of gardenias and damp soil. Elena Valerio had not been a mafia wife. She had been a botanist, a woman who found more solace in roots and petals than in the cold empire her husband built. Her hands, like Isabella's, had always been stained green, her nails filed short, dirt beneath them. The connection was too specific, too brutal. He looked back at the file, at the photograph of Isabella leaving the hospital, her face pale with exhaustion. This wasn't a setup, this was something else. Isabella knew, of course, who he was. Every Monday, she arranged the 12 white roses, her hands moving with a ritualistic purpose. Each stem was a prayer, each thorn removed, a memory. She was 5 years old, hidden behind a stack of crates at the bee dock, her father meeting an informant, then shouting, the smell of gasoline. The world had turned white hot, the sound, a roar that stole her breath. She remembered the heat, the terror, and then a hand, a boy, barely a teenager, his face streaked with soot, his eyes wide with his own shock. He had grabbed her arm, pulling her through a gap in a collapsing wall, shoving her behind a steel barrier just as the secondary explosion hit. He had saved her. She had learned his name years later, seeing his photo in the paper when his father died, Dominic Valerio. The boy who saved her had become the man her father was sworn to destroy. The roses were her silent thank you. They were the only thing she could give, a debt paid to a man who would never remember he was owed. Dante returned to the White Petal 3 days later. The sun was out, but the air was cold. The bell chimed. Isabella was behind the counter, her back to him, arranging lilies in a vase. She tensed, her shoulders tightening, but she did not turn around. "Can I help you?" Her voice was quiet, huskier than he expected. "I need an arrangement," Dante said, his voice a low rumble in the small, fragrant space. "Something for a memorial." She turned slowly. Her blue eyes met his, and this time, the sadness was mixed with a clear, sharp fear. She knew exactly who he was. "What kind of flowers?" she asked, her hands clutching the edges of her apron. "I don't know." He moved closer, not threateningly, but with the gravity of a planet pulling a moon into orbit. He stopped just short of the counter. "What do you recommend for something complicated?" Her smile was a ghost, a brief tremor of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Some people use lilies for peace, others, carnations for remembrance." "And white roses?" he asked, his voice dropping. He watched her swallow. The air crackled, thick with unspoken words. She held his gaze, and the fear in her eyes was overlaid with something else, defiance, resignation. "White roses," she said softly, "are for the truth." Dante studied her, the worn fabric of her sweater, the faint, dark circles under her eyes, the raw determination that kept her standing straight when every instinct told her to run. This was not a spy. This was not an enemy. This was a woman with a secret that was crushing her. He was drawn to her, to the damaged, unbreakable thing inside her. It was a gravitational pull he had not felt in his life. He saw a mirror of his own isolation in her gaze. For the first time in 15 years, Dominic Valerio felt the dangerous, reckless urge to trust. He wanted to believe in the girl with the sad eyes and the hands that smelled like his mother's. He bought the arrangement, lilies and carnations. He paid in cash, a stack of bills that was 5 times the asking price, and left before she could give him change. The following week, he returned. "Another memorial," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. And so it began. The excuse became a running, silent joke between them. Dominic Valerio's associates, it seemed, were dropping dead at an alarming rate. One week it was for a business partner. The next, a distant uncle. Isabella stopped asking. She would simply nod, her hands reaching for the blooms he gestured toward, and he would stand and watch her work. The shop became a confessional, though neither of them ever confessed. The air between them grew thick with unspoken things. He would lean against the old wooden counter, his expensive wool coat seeming out of place against the rustic, pollen-dusted surfaces. He never looked hurried. He never took a call. When he was in the white pedal, the outside world ceased to exist. She, in turn, began to breathe a little easier around him. The initial heart-stopping fear had subsided, replaced by a tense, humming awareness. His presence filled the small space, made the air warmer, more dangerous. Their interactions were built on small transgressions. His gaze, which lingered on her hands as she wrapped twine around a bouquet, longer than was necessary. Her voice, which softened when she spoke to him, losing its protective edge. One afternoon, as she handed him a spray of yellow tulips, his fingers deliberately brushed hers. It was not an accident. The touch was light, brief, but it sent a jolt straight up her arm, making her gasp. He held her gaze, his dark eyes unreadable, and she was the first to look away. "These mean," she started, her voice unsteady. "What?" he prompted, not moving his hand. "Sunshine, hopeless love." He gave a small, humorless smile. Appropriate. She found herself talking to him, filling the silence. She told him about the flowers, their secret language. "Freesias are for trust," she explained one rainy Tuesday, her back to him as she worked. "And rosemary is for remembrance. My grandmother taught me. She said every bouquet tells a story." Dante was quiet for a long moment. "The first time I remember seeing flowers," he said. His voice so low she almost missed it. "Was at my mother's funeral. They were all gardenias. I hated the smell. It choked everything." Isabella stopped working. She turned to look at him. He was not looking at her, but at a white rose in a bucket. His expression lost in a past she could not access. He was sharing a piece of himself, a small, cracked fragment of the man behind the reputation. She liked gardenias, Isabella asked gently. She loved them. She was a florist, he said, and the admission hung in the air between them, heavy and profound. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Before she married my father." The connection was no longer just a spark. It was a live wire, exposed and dangerous. The ritual was broken on a Thursday. It was almost 9 at night, and a brutal November storm was lashing the city. Isabella was totaling the day's meager receipts, her mind on her father, whose cough had sounded worse that morning. She was locking the deadbolt when a sharp knock echoed on the glass. Her heart leaped into her throat. She peered through the rain-streaked window. It was Dante. He was alone, without his car, and he was soaked to the bone, his black hair plastered to his skull, his expensive suit clinging to his frame. He looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man who had lost a fight. In his hand, he held a single, perfect bouquet of white roses. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers trembling, and pulled the door open. "You're wet," he finished. Stepping inside, he dripped onto the entryway mat. He looked around the dark shop, now lit only by the faint orange glow of the streetlights. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I know." He held out the flowers. They were not wrapped in paper or twine. They were raw, wild, their thorns still intact. To return the favor. She took them from him, their fingers brushing again. This time, the contact was warm, skin against skin. "I don't have a vase," she stammered. "It doesn't matter." She led him into the small back room, a cluttered space with a hot plate, a worn armchair, and a small table. She lit a single white candle, plunging the room into a soft, flickering intimacy. The sound of the rain was a drumbeat against the roof. She poured 2 glasses of cheap red wine she kept for difficult days. She handed one to him. Their hands touched. "Why?" she finally asked, the question that had lived between them for weeks. "Why are you here, Dante?" He took a sip of the wine, his eyes never leaving her face. The candlelight softened the hard lines of his jaw, made his eyes seem deeper, sadder. "I think you know why." He set the glass down. "The men I have, memorials for, they're real, but they're not why I come." He reached out, his hand moving with a deliberate slowness, giving her time to flinch, to pull away. She remained perfectly still. Her breath caught in her chest. His fingers touched her cheek. His skin was cold from the rain, but the touch itself was electric, burning. "I come," he whispered, his voice rough, "because this is the only place in my entire life that feels sane." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She leaned into his touch, a betrayal of everything she should have feared. "Isabella," he breathed, his thumb stroking her skin. Flash? A blinding white light exploded from the street, illuminating the back room for a split second, freezing them in a perfect, damning tableau. The mafia boss, the detective's daughter, the candlelight, the touch. The spell shattered. Dante moved with a predator's speed. He was on his feet, pulling her to the floor, his body shielding hers as he lunged for the light switch, plunging them into total darkness. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice no longer soft, but the flat, cold steel of the man who ran the city. He crept to the front window, peering through the slats of the blinds. A black sedan, its lights off, screeched away from the curb and disappeared into the rain. The intimacy was gone, ripped away, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of fear. He turned, a shadow in the darkness. "Lock this, and do not open it again tonight, for anyone." He was gone before she could even stand up, the front bell chiming his exit into the storm. The next morning, Isabella arrived to open the shop, her hands still shaking. Someone had shoved a newspaper under her door. It wasn't the Tribune. It was an underground tabloid, the kind that trafficked in the secrets of his world. The photograph was grainy, taken through the rain-streaked window, but it was unmistakable. His hand on her cheek, her eyes wide and fixed on his, the single candle between them. The headline was scrawled above it in brutal, bold letters: "Valerio intimate with ex-detective Rowan's daughter." The newspaper hit Dante's desk with a flat, heavy sound. Rico Morano, his face pale, his dark eyes radiating controlled fury, stood over it. "I told you," Rico said, his voice a low rasp. "I told you it was a setup. She's bait. Dante, a cop's daughter. Right when the old guard is looking for a reason to move on us, and now this." Dante didn't look at the picture. He looked out the window of his office, his hands clasped so tightly behind his back his knuckles were white. She didn't take the picture. "Rico?" "It doesn't matter. Perception is reality. The Orpheus network hit our warehouse at the docks last night, burned $2 million in electronics. They knew exactly where to hit, exactly when our guards were light. How this?" He slapped the newspaper again. "Is how they're using her to make you look weak, distracted, or worse. She's feeding them information." "She's not," Dante said. The words were flat, absolute. He had seen her eyes. He had felt her tremble. He knew fear, and he knew manipulation. This was not that. This was terror. "You don't know that," Rico shot back Frau Iwas. "You're too close. While you're playing Romeo in a flower shop, our world is starting to burn. And that's not all." Rico tossed a second, official-looking document onto the desk. "The Chicago PD just reopened the file on your mother's murder. After 20 years, they're leaking to the press that they have new evidence pointing to your father." Dante turned, his body rigid. "That's impossible. That case is buried." It was, but now they have a public angle. They have the daughter of the original investigating officer, Rico said, his voice dropping. "Seen in a compromising position with the son of the man he was investigating. This is a coordinated attack. Dante, They're using her to dismantle your father's legacy and you with it." The phone on Dante's desk buzzed. It was his internal security line. He snatched it up. "What?" "Boss," a frantic voice said. "It's the Florist. 2 squad cars just pulled up. They're taking her in." Dante's blood turned to ice. "On what charge?" "They're just bringing her in for questioning about the Rowan case, the old one. Boss, the press is already there. It's a circus." Dante slammed the phone down. The contained rage in the room exploded. He swept the vase of white roses off his desk. It shattered against the wall. Water, glass, and petals spraying across the floor. "Dante, stop!" Rico yelled. "Think! This is what they want. They want you to react. They're trying to draw you out." "I have her," Dante snarled, grabbing his coat. "She's a civilian. They can't hold her. They'll ask her questions. She'll answer. They'll let her go. Don't blow this, boss. Don't walk into their trap." "She won't talk," Dante said, his voice suddenly quiet, deadly. "What do you mean?" "She's loyal to her father, to that code she lives by. They'll ask her about me, about what I said. She won't say a word, and they'll keep her." He shoved his keys into his pocket. "They don't know who they're dealing with." "They know who you are," Rico shouted after him, but Dante was already gone. The police precinct was a media storm. News vans lined the street, their lights flashing blue and red, mixing with the official strobes of the squad cars. Dante's Rolls-Royce cut through the street like a shark, scattering reporters. He didn't park. He left the car in the middle of the road and walked into the precinct. The lobby was chaos. He ignored the shouts of, "Mr. Valerio," and pushed through the doors into the bullpen. A detective, his face smug, stepped in front of him. "You can't be in here, Mr. Valerio. This is a restricted area." "Where is she?" Dante's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the station. "Miss Rowan is assisting us with an inquiry. You'll have to wait." Dante didn't wait. He grabbed the detective by his cheap tie and slammed him against the wall, the man's feet dangling. Wrong answer. Shouts erupted. Officers drew their weapons. "Police, let him go! Valerio." Dante released the detective, who slumped to the floor, gasping. He walked toward the interrogation rooms as if he owned the building, the officers parting before his cold, murderous calm. He kicked open the door to interrogation room 2. Isabella was sitting at the table, her face ashen, her hands cuffed to the table. 2 detectives stood over her, one yelling. She was trembling, but her eyes were dry, fixed on the wall, her lips sealed. She looked up when the door crashed open. Her eyes widened, not in relief, but in horror. "Dante, no." "Get your hands off her," he said. "Valerio, you just assaulted an officer. You're under arrest." One of the detectives lunged at him. Dante moved. It was not a brawl. It was a brutal, economic dismantling. He broke the detective's wrist with one twist, used him as a shield against the second, and sent the second man crashing into the one-way mirror, which spiderwebbed on impact. He turned to Isabella, his chest heaving. He ripped the key from the detective's belt and unlocked her cuffs. He pulled her to her feet, his grip on her arm bruising. "You can't," she whispered, shaking. "This is insane." "They started this." He pulled her out into the hallway. An alarm was blaring. The station was in an uproar. He shoved her toward a side exit marked fire escape. A cop tried to grab him. Dante threw him into a desk. He pushed Isabella through the door into the cold night air. They were on a metal fire escape, 4 stories up, overlooking an alley. The rain had started again, a cold drizzle. Red and blue lights flashed from the street below, painting the wet brick in frantic, revolving colors. The air smelled of wet asphalt, exhaust, and the faint, acrid tang of smoke from a nearby dumpster fire. "Dante, what have you done?" she cried, backing against the railing. He advanced on her, cornering her. He put both hands on the railing, trapping her between his arms, his body inches from hers. He was breathing like a man who had just run a mile. "They used you," he growled. "They put your picture on a newspaper to flush me out, to discredit me, to hurt you, I didn't say anything," she stammered, her hands flat against his chest, trying to keep a space between them that was already gone. "I know." His dark eyes searched her face, frantic and raw. The mask was gone. The boss was gone. This was just a man, torn open. They were going to keep you here until you broke. They don't know you. I do. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her gaze dropping to his hand. His knuckles were split open from the mirror. Blood dripped onto the metal platform, mixing with the rain. "It doesn't matter." He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. The whole world was sirens, shouting and flashing lights. "They said you were a trap, that you were bait, that this," his gaze flickered to her lips, "was a weakness." Tears finally welled up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I never wanted—" "Listen to me." His voice was desperate, cracking. "If you are a trap, Isabella, then I accept being burned in it. Do you understand me? I don't care." And he kissed her. It was not the gentle touch in the flower shop. It was a collision. It was desperate, raw, and full of all the violence and fear of the last 2 days. It was the taste of rain and smoke and the metallic tang of his own blood. His hand left the railing, tangling in her damp hair, holding her still as his mouth claimed hers. It was a kiss of possession, of desperation, a brand. She gasped against his lips, and her hands, which had been pushing him away, suddenly clenched the fabric of his coat, holding on as if she were drowning. It was not soft, it was not slow, it was the frantic, breathless acknowledgement of an alliance that would destroy them both. It was intense, it was overwhelming, but it was not crude. It was a promise and a curse. He broke away, both of them breathing hard, their breath pluming in the cold air. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed for a single second. "They started a war," he whispered, his voice shaking with adrenaline and something new, something terrifying. "But they involved you. Now I finish it, yet." Their love, born in the scent of white roses, had just been baptized in sin, smoke, and secrets, and it was just the beginning. The alley was a death trap. They scrambled down the iron fire escape, the metal groaning under Dante's weight. He shoved her toward the mouth of the alley, his bloody hand pressed to the wall for balance. His Rolls-Royce was visible, a beacon of safety 50 yards away. "Dante! They're coming!" Isabella screamed as the precinct doors burst open behind them. They ran. He pushed her into the passenger seat, the leather a shocking contrast to her fear. He was behind the wheel, the engine roaring to life, just as the first shots rang out, sparking harmlessly off the pavement behind them. He drove with a controlled, cold fury, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping his bleeding knuckles. His phone erupted. He hit the speaker. "Rico, talk." "Boss, it's Orpheus." Rico's voice was strained, gunfire echoing in the background. "They hit the Southside warehouse. It's a 5-alarm fire. They knew, Dante, they knew you'd be occupied. They're trying to cut us in half." Dante looked at Isabella, her face illuminated by the flashing dashboard lights. It was a setup. All of it. The picture. The arrest. They had used her to pull him out of position, to make him a public spectacle. And then they had struck his assets. He wrenched the wheel, turning toward the industrial sector. "I'm on my way." "No, boss, it's too hot. We're pulling out. You're bleeding." "I'm not running." He arrived at a war zone. Flames licked the night sky, orange and black. Men were exchanging gunfire across the shipping yard. Dante slammed the car into park behind a container, pulling Isabella down. "Stay here. Do not move." He stepped out into the chaos, his presence alone momentarily steadying his men. He was directing fire, a general in a bespoke suit, when a shadow moved from his blind spot. "Dante!" Isabella screamed. He turned. The muzzle flash was blinding. He felt the impact not as a sharp pain, but as a dull, massive punch to his side. Stealing his breath and buckling his knees, he fired twice, the shadow dropping. Boss Rico was there, grabbing him, hauling him up. "You're hit. We're gone. Now." They were back in the car, speeding away, the warehouse and millions in assets burning behind them. Dante was slumped against the window, his hand pressed to his side, the fabric of his shirt already soaked. "The penthouse is compromised," he gritted out, the words thick. "They'll be waiting, all safe houses, compromised." "Where? Dante, where do I take you?" Rico was frantic. Dante looked at Isabella. Her face was a pale mask of terror. There was only one place. The shop. Her apartment. Above the shop. "Are you insane?" Rico yelled. "That's the first place?" "No," Dante cut him off. "It's the last place they'd expect. It's the one place that isn't mine. Go, get me there, then lock this neighborhood down. No one in, no one out." The apartment above the white petal was small, smelling of lavender and old wood. It was her sanctuary, and he was violating it, bleeding all over her floor. Rico and another man helped him onto the simple bed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They left a black duffel bag on the floor and were gone. The silence that descended was deafening, broken only by the sound of his breathing and the distant, wailing sirens of the city. "Let me see," Isabella said, her voice shaking, but her hands surprisingly steady. She grabbed scissors from a drawer and began to cut away his shirt. He hissed as the cold air hit the wound. It was a deep, jagged graze along his ribs, bleeding heavily, but the bullet had passed through. "It's clean," she whispered, as if reassuring herself. I can fix this." She worked with a focused intensity, her florist's hands now tending to him. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic from her bathroom cabinet, her touch gentle but firm. He did not flinch, but his eyes never left her face, tracking her movements, reading the fear and the strength warring in her expression. She bandaged him tightly with strips of a clean sheet. When she was done, she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands stained with his blood. The long night began. They were fugitives. Trapped together in the small room by the city he once ruled, they talked, their voices low, the adrenaline fading to a raw, shared exhaustion. "You're a monster, Dante," she said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Watching the candlelight flicker, you destroy everything you touch. You destroyed that police station. And you, he countered, his voice rough with pain, send flowers to a killer. What does that make you? Isabella. "It makes me grateful," she whispered. "You saved my life." "I don't remember it." "I know, that's why it mattered." They talked about the accident at the docks, about his mother, about her father, about the suffocating weight of the past. They spoke of destiny, of the choices that are made for you, and the ones you make that damn you. "I have never," as he said, his hand finding hers, his skin hot, "chosen anything, not really. My life was a debt, until you." The air in the room was too thick. The space between them was non-existent. He tugged gently on her hand, pulling her closer. She resisted for a moment, then relented, lying down on the bed beside him, her body tense. "Stay," he whispered, the command softened by pain. He turned, his uninjured side toward her. He raised his hand, the one that had held a gun, the one that had bled on the fire escape, and cupped her face. Isabella. The kiss that followed was nothing like the one before. It was not desperate or violent. It was a slow, deep surrender. It was an acknowledgement of the abyss, and a choice to fall into it together. Her hands rested on his chest, careful of the bandages, feeling the heavy, steady beat of his heart. His lips were soft, searching, learning the taste of her, a taste of peace he had never known. There was no distance left between them. The night was filled with the sound of their breathing, the rustle of fabric, and the quiet, whispered words of two people who had nothing left to lose. It was the frantic, final connection of two souls in the middle of a war, finding a moment of grace before the next battle. Isabella woke first. Gray, cold daylight streamed through the window. For a moment she was disoriented, tangled in the sheets with the city's most dangerous man. He was asleep, his breathing deep, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen. She slid from the bed, her body aching. She saw the black duffel bag Rico had left. It was open. A manila folder, thick and worn, had spilled partially onto the floor. Curious, she knelt. She saw the name on the tab and her heart stopped. Rowan Arthur. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was not a police file. It was his file, Dante's, a deep, thorough investigation into her father, his entire career, his service record, notes on his obsession with the Valerio family, and, at the very back, copies of his medical records, his diagnosis, his prognosis. The intimate whispers of the night, the confessions, the raw vulnerability, it all turned to ash in her mouth. He had been investigating her from the beginning. He knew about her father. He knew her weakness, the visits to the shop, the chance encounter in the rain, the rescue from the precinct. It was all a lie, a cold, calculated maneuver. She had not been his solace. She had been his leverage. She felt sick. She stumbled back, dressing in a frantic, silent haste. She looked at him one last time. This beautiful, broken man who had saved her life as a child, only to destroy it as a woman. She went to the front of the shop, dark and cold, and took a single white rose from a bucket. She walked back to the bed and placed it on the pillow next to his head. The truth. Then she fled. Dante woke to the pain in his side and the smell of roses. He opened his eyes. The bed was empty. Isabella. He saw it, the single white rose on the pillow. His blood ran cold. He sat up, ignoring the searing pain, and saw the duffel bag. He saw the Rowan file on the floor. No, Isabella, you don't understand. He grabbed his phone to call Rico, to find her, to drag her back and explain. But the phone vibrated in his hand with an incoming message from an unknown number. It was a video file. He played it. Isabella, her face pale, tears streaming, running down the street, away from the shop, a black van, the logo of the Orpheus network on its side. Screeching to a halt, 2 men grabbed her. She fought, but they subdued her and threw her inside. The video ended. A text appeared. A pity. She was beautiful. You have 1 hour. The old B-Doc. Pier 12. Come alone. Dante stared at the screen. This was the trap. The real one. They had anticipated his every move. They knew he would go for her. They knew she would be his undoing. He stood, pulling on his clothes, his side a blaze of agony. He picked up his gun from the bedside table. He knew it was a trap. He knew he was walking into his own execution. He went anyway. The old B-Dock at Pier 12 was a graveyard of steel. Rusting containers were stacked like forgotten tombstones under a sky the color of dirty water. This was where his world, and Isabella's, had been forged in fire 22 years ago. Dante stepped out of his car, his hand pressed tight against the bandage on his side. The first wound throbbed with every heartbeat. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and the cold, metallic scent of the lake. There was no one, just the wind whistling through the canyons of steel. Isabella, his voice was swallowed by the labyrinth. A shot rang out, not at him, at the ground near his feet, kicking up asphalt, a warning. Alone, I said. The voice echoed from a loudspeaker, distorted and inhuman. Drop your weapon. Dante looked at the gun in his hand. He let it fall to the pavement, kicking it away. Now, walk toward the center. He obeyed, his senses on fire. He was a dead man. He knew it. But he had to see her. The file, the look of betrayal he had imagined on her face when she saw it. He had to make her understand. He rounded a corner between 2 towering red containers. The space opened into a small, clear square, lit by harsh industrial floodlights. Isabella was there. She was tied to a steel chair, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Dante, no, run!" she screamed, her voice hoarse. "It's—" "Quiet, my dear." A man stepped out of the shadows. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a face that was a roadmap of scars and a hard life. He wore an immaculate black suit, a stark contrast to the grime, but it was his eyes. They were Dante's eyes, cold, dark, and utterly devoid of mercy. Dante froze, the pain in his side, the fear for Isabella, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, impossible shock. "You've been dead for 10 years, Dante whispered. "Only on paper," Luciano Valerio said, his voice smooth, lacking the digital distortion. He smiled, a gesture that held no warmth. "A boating accident, so simple. It allowed me to shed the Valerio name, to build something real, the Orpheus Network." Dante stared at his father, the man who had supposedly drowned, leaving a 12-year-old Dante to be groomed for the throne. "You've been a disappointment, Dominic," Luciano said, circling Isabella, his hand resting on her shoulder. She flinched violently. "All this time, I watched you. You consolidated power, yes, but you have her." He tapped his own chest. "The weakness, your mother's weakness." A cold dread, worse than any bullet, settled in Dante's stomach. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother," Luciano sneered, his face twisting. "Elena, she wanted out. She wanted to take you, to go clean. She was going to talk. She was a florist, for God's sake. She never understood this." He gestured to the yard. "The city is blood. You cannot wash it off with perfume." "You—" Dante's voice cracked. "The papers said it was a rival family." "I am my own rival. I am the only one strong enough," Luciano said, his voice rising. "I gave her a choice. The family or the grave. She chose poorly, so I took her to that alley and I cleaned up the mess." The world tilted. The foundation of Dante's entire life, the grief, the vengeance. The code he lived by, it was all a lie, built on the murder of his mother by his father. "And you," Luciano suddenly pointed at Isabella, a cruel realization dawning on his face. I remember you, don't I?" He grabbed her chin. "The detective's daughter, the B-Doc, the explosion." He looked back at Dante, a look of horrific clarity. 22 years ago, right here. You pulled her from the fire, didn't you? The little girl behind the crates? My God, I looked for that child for years, the one witness I missed. And you, my own son, you brought her right to me. Dante's mind exploded. The roses, the debt, the file. He hadn't been investigating her to use her. He had been investigating her because he needed to know why he felt this connection, why she seemed tied to his own past. He was trying to understand the ghost, not set a trap. "She wasn't a lie," Dante whispered, the realization ripping through him. He looked at Isabella. It was real. "It ends here," Luciano said, raising his gun, not at Dante, but at Isabella's head. "I will do for you what I should have done 20 years ago. I will cut out the weakness." "No." Dante launched himself forward. A shot exploded, deafening in the enclosed space. Pain, white-hot and catastrophic, tore through his shoulder. He staggered but did not stop. He was a wounded animal, fueled by a lifetime of grief. He collided with his father. They went down, grappling for the weapon. Dante's wound screamed, his side. His shoulder, he was bleeding out. Fast. "You are just like her," Luciano roared, slamming Dante's head against the concrete. Dante looked up, his vision swimming in red, past his father's face to Isabella, who was frantically trying to free her hands. "I am not you," Dante snarled, his voice a bloody rasp. He used his father's weight against him, rolling, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He got his hand on the gun. They fought for it. 2 generations of violence, one for power, one for redemption. The gun went off, once, twice. Luciano Valerio's body went rigid. The surprise in his dark eyes mirrored Dante's. He slumped, his grip loosening. Dante pushed him off and tried to stand. The adrenaline was gone. The strings were cut. His legs buckled. He fell to the ground, the concrete cold against his cheek. "Dante, oh God, Dante!" Isabella was there. She'd broken free, her wrists raw. She was kneeling in the pool of his blood, her hands pressing desperately against the wounds in his shoulder and side. "No, no, no! Stay with me! Somebody help! Help us!" She was crying, her tears washing streaks of grime from her face as they fell onto his. His blood soaked the front of her shirt, a dark, terrible stain. He looked at her. The world was fading, the edges of the containers blurring into the dark sky. He saw her, not just as the woman he loved, but as the little girl he had pulled from the fire, the circle, completed. He tried to speak. His throat was full. "The file," he choked out, his hand weakly finding hers. "The file." "Shh, don't talk. The ambulance, It wasn't to use you." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. He needed her to know, before the dark took him. The white rose, on the pillow. It was an apology for looking for the secret. Her sob was a physical, wrenching sound. She pressed her forehead to his, holding him. I know, I love you. Just stay." His eyes drifted shut. Her voice was the last thing he heard. The ambulance never came. The sirens Isabella heard were not for him, but for the police officers he had assaulted. The B-dock was a dead zone, a black hole in the city's grid. But Rico came, tipped off by the tracker Dante always carried. He arrived not with an ambulance, but with a panel van and a grim-faced medic. They bundled Dante's unconscious, bleeding body into the back, Rico grabbing Isabella by the arm. "You're coming, too. You're the only thing he'll fight for." Dante survived. He hovered in a gray, pain-filled limbo for 3 days in a sterile, private clinic owned by the Valerio family. When he woke, his first word was her name. But survival had come at a cost. The city was hunting him. The assault on the precinct, the shootout at the warehouse, the patricide at the docks. Dante Valerio was no longer an untouchable boss. He was public enemy number 1. The Orpheus network, now leaderless, was crumbling, and the FBI, sensing the vacuum, was moving in, seizing assets, arresting his men. Rico, his face etched with a grief and betrayal Dante had never seen, gave him the news. "The organization is broken. Dante, your father's act. It shattered everything. The feds are offering deals. Everyone is talking. We have to get you out." "Isabella," Dante's voice was a rasp. "She's safe, for now," Rico said, his eyes cold. "She's the only one who won't talk. She's a liability. Boss, they want her as a witness. You need to disappear, alone." "No," Dante said. The single word was absolute. "Get her. We go together." They fled north, 2 ghosts in a stolen car, slipping across the Canadian border during a blinding snowstorm. They left behind their lives, their names, and the city that had tried to bury them. They found refuge in the ruins of a life someone else had abandoned, a massive, derelict greenhouse complex outside a small town in Quebec. The glass panes were shattered in places, the metal frame rusting, but one section remained intact, heated by a forgotten propane tank. They became refugees from their own lives. Isabella nursed him, her fear replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. She changed his bandages, bartered for antibiotics in the local town, and held him when the fever dreams took him back to the alley with his mother. And as he healed, their love, born in secrets and baptized in blood, finally had room to breathe. In the suffocating quiet of the snow-covered landscape, they were not a mafia boss and a florist. They were just Dante and Isabella. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind. They learned each other. He taught her what he knew, the harsh lessons of his world. He took a gun from his go bag and placed it in her hand. "This is how you hold it," he said. His body behind hers, his hand covering hers, his voice a low murmur against her ear. "You don't aim. You point. You feel it. You have to be ready." "I hate it," she whispered, the weight of the steel unnatural in her hand. "I know," he said, his grip tightening. "That's why you have to learn." In turn, she taught him what she knew. The greenhouse was filled with dormant, frozen soil and rotted planting bags. She found a bag of seeds in a rusted shed, white roses. "You have to break the soil," she instructed, her hands in the cold dirt. You can't just plant, you have to make it welcoming. He knelt beside her, his large, scarred hands clumsy in the earth. He, who had broken so much, was now learning to nurture. One afternoon, as the first true snow of the deep winter began to fall, they planted the rose seeds in a long, salvaged trough. The flakes drifted down through the broken glass panes, melting on their hair. "It's too cold. They'll never grow," he said, watching her pack the soil. "They will," she said, her breath pluming. "They just need a reason. They have to want the light." He stopped, his hand over hers in the dirt. He looked at her. This woman who had seen the absolute worst of him and had not run. This woman who had sent him white roses as a thank you, and who had received only violence in return. He leaned in and kissed her, his lips cold from the air, the taste of snow and earth on her skin. It was a kiss of profound, aching sweetness, a promise made in a frozen wasteland. There was no desperation, no fear. There was only the truth, finally, between them. Their fragile peace lasted 5 weeks. It was Rico who betrayed them. Rico, who had lost everything: his position, his future, his loyalty in the fallout of Luciano's war. He had made a deal with the FBI, trading his boss for his own immunity. They woke to the sound of helicopters, the crunch of boots in the snow. Dante was at the window in an instant. The greenhouse was surrounded. A dozen agents in tactical gear, their weapons trained on the glass structure. A voice echoed over a loudspeaker. "Dominic Valerio, this is the FBI. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands in the air." Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping. Dante turned to her. His face was not afraid. It was calm, resolute. He had known this was not an escape, only a delay. "Dante," she whispered, grabbing his arm. "No, there has to be a way." "There is," he said. He took her face in his hands, his gaze locking with hers. "They want me, not you. You were a witness, a victim, Rowan's daughter. I won't leave you." "Yes, you will." His voice was iron. "I spent my entire life as a prisoner to my father's name. I will not let you be a prisoner to mine. You are not an accessory to this, Isabella. You are my absolution." "No," she wept, her hands clinging to his shirt. He kissed her, hard and deep, pouring every unspoken word, every moment in the greenhouse, every ounce of his love into it. He pulled away, his forehead resting against hers. Promise me you'll live. Go back. Reopen the white petal. Be the girl who sends flowers." "I can't." "Promise me," and he commanded, his voice breaking. I promise," she sobbed. He took his gun from the waistband of his jeans and placed it on the table. He kissed her forehead. "I love you." He walked to the door. "I'm coming out," he yelled. "I am unarmed. The woman inside is a civilian. She is my hostage. I am releasing her." He pushed open the door and walked out into the blinding white snow, his hands raised high above his head. Agents swarmed him, slamming him to the frozen ground, cuffing him. Isabella watched through the glass, her hand pressed to the pane, her heart shattering. Dante was hauled to his feet. He turned, his face bruised, his eyes searching. He found her in the window. The noise of the helicopters, the shouting, it all faded. There was only his gaze. He did not look defeated. He did not look angry. He looked free. He held her eyes as they dragged him away, a final, silent look that said everything. Then he was gone, forced into a vehicle, and the convoy drove away, leaving her alone in the broken glass house, surrounded by snow and the promise of white roses. 3 years passed, the city of Chicago, ever relentless, paved over the scars of the Valerio Empire. The newspapers found new monsters, new scandals. The name Valerio faded from the headlines, relegated to history, a cautionary tale. Isabella kept her promise. She returned from Canada, a ghost in her own right. She had been questioned by the FBI for weeks, a process that drained her. But she held to the truth Dante had given her. She was a hostage, a victim. They had no evidence to hold her, And with Luciano Valerio dead and Dante cooperating from behind bars, they had no desire to do so. They let her go. Her father, Arthur Rowan, passed away 6 months after her return. She held his hand. The bitterness and obsession that had defined his life finally smoothed away in the quiet of the end. She was, at last, unbound from the past. She used the last of her savings to reopen the White Petal. The shop was the same worn wooden floors, the same golden light. But its purpose was different. The neighborhood saw a change in her. The profound, tragic sadness in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, unbreakable strength. The shop found a new clientele. It became known as the place that sent flowers to the forgotten. Its main business was no longer weddings or birthdays, but deliveries to the local and federal prison systems. And every Monday, for 3 years, Isabella Rowan prepared one specific bouquet, 12 long-stemmed white roses, thorns meticulously removed, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with simple twine. She addressed it to inmate 409B, ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. She never received a reply. The prison did not allow return correspondence for its most high-profile inmates. The silence was absolute. The flowers were an act of blind faith, a message sent into the void. She did more. She used the small profits from the shop to start a halfway house, a small, quiet charity run out of her apartment. She helped the women left behind, the girlfriends, wives, and daughters of men swallowed by the life. She taught them how to arrange flowers, how to manage finances, how to build a life outside the shadow of the criminal underworld. She was redeeming the name Valerio in the only way she knew how. She became a local legend in her own small way. They called her the Woman of the White Roses. She was a fixture of the community, a quiet pillar of grace. But every night, when she locked the shop door, she would stand in the darkness, her hand on the lock, and remember the feel of his skin, the sound of his voice, the way he looked at her in the snow. One Tuesday, a day like any other, the mail arrived. Bills, supplier catalogs, and a single, plain manila envelope. It had no return address. The postmark was from Colorado. Her hands, so steady when arranging flowers, trembled. She sat at her workbench, the scent of lavender and freesia surrounding her, and tore it open. It was not a letter. It was a photograph. The quality was poor, grainy, as if taken in secret and smuggled out. It was a picture of a small, desolate patch of dirt in a concrete yard, surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. But there, in the center, pushing up through the cracked earth and reaching for the light, was a single, stubborn white rose. It was in full, glorious bloom. Behind the photo was a piece of cheap, lined paper torn from a notebook. The handwriting was his, the same strong, sharp script she remembered. It said, "I'm still keeping my promise." The note fell from her fingers. A sound broke from her, a sound she had not made in 3 years. Not when her father died, not when she was questioned, not during the long, lonely nights. It was a sob, a raw, wrenching crack in her composure. She put her head down on the workbench, among the petals and stems, and wept. She cried for the years lost, for the pain, for the blood, and for the impossible. Stubborn hope that had just been returned to her. He was alive. He remembered. He was, in his own way, planting flowers. She cried until she was empty. Then she stood up, washed her face, and went back to work. The belief, which had been a flickering ember, was now a steady flame. He would come back. She did not know how or when, but he would. The seasons turned. Summer faded into a crisp, cold autumn. It was a Thursday, near closing. The wind was high, rattling the shop's old windows, a precursor to the first snow. She was sweeping the floor, her mind on the inventory for the next day. The bell above the door chimed. She turned, a polite, practiced smile on her face. "I'll be right with..." Her heart stopped. He was standing in the doorway, the man from the photograph, the man from her memory, the man from the snow. He was thinner. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn wool coat. There were new lines around his eyes and a streak of gray at his temple. The look of a hunted predator was gone. His eyes, once so cold, were quiet, deep and tired. They held the weight of 3 years in solitary confinement. But the way he looked at her, that had not changed at all. They stood, separated by 10 feet of floor and 3 years of silence, and the world just stopped. The chiming of the bell still hung in the air, a perfect echo of the first time he had walked into her life. He had come back. The broom clattered from Isabella's hand, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden, absolute silence. He was real. He was not a memory, not a ghost conjured by her longing. He was standing in her shop. He didn't move, afraid that any sudden motion would shatter the moment, would break the spell. He just stood in the frame of the door, a traveler who had crossed a desert, his eyes fixed on her as if she were the only source of water in the world. "Dante," she whispered. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a prayer she had only spoken in the privacy of her own heart for 3 years. He smiled. It was not the sharp, dangerous smile of the mafia boss, nor the pained grimace of the wounded man. It was a new smile, tired and marked by loss, but it reached his eyes, and his eyes. They were the same. They were fixed on her. Isabella. He said her name, and the single word was enough. It held all the years, all the pain, all the waiting. He took a step inside, and the bell chimed again, softly, as the door clicked shut behind him, sealing them inside, shutting out the cold Chicago street and the life that had kept them apart. She took a hesitant step toward him, her hand raised to her chest, trying to regulate her breathing. "How?" she breathed. "How are you here?" They said life. They said you were in Florence. They said you would never get out." "My father built an empire on secrets," Dante said, his voice rougher than she remembered, the result of long silences. "When he died, I was the only one left who knew where all the bodies were buried, figuratively and literally." He moved closer, his gaze cataloging every change in her, the new confidence in her stance, the way her hair was pinned up, the familiar strength in her sad, blue eyes. "I cooperated," he explained. "The Orpheus Network was a global entity. The FBI had no idea how deep it went. I gave them everything, the accounts, the routes, the names of the politicians he owned, the other cells, everything my father built. It took them 3 years to dismantle it. Your testimony, the news. They kept it sealed. It was a deal. My information, my testimony against the entire network in exchange for this." He gestured to himself, to his freedom. "A pardon. It was finalized this morning. I came straight here." "Rico?" she asked softly. "He's in federal protection. He gave me up, but I don't blame him." For the first time, his voice held no malice, only a deep weariness. He lost everything, too. Now they were only a few feet apart, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other. The air was thick with the scent of the shop, her scent lilies, damp earth and roses. He had dreamed of this smell. He had held onto it in a sterile concrete cell, a reminder that a world like this, that she, still existed. She looked at him, truly looked at him. The man who had been a specter of violence and power was gone. He was just a man. He stood straighter, as if a great physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but he was scarred. Her eyes traced a faint, silver line that ran from just below his ear down his neck, disappearing beneath the collar of his worn wool coat. She reached out, her fingers trembling and lightly, so lightly, touched the scar. His skin was warm. He was real. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. Dante closed his eyes, his entire body shuddering at her touch, a contact he had thought he would never feel again. He raised his hand, covering hers, pressing her fingers gently against his skin. "Only when you're not here," he said, his voice thick. A tear, the first of many, escaped her eye and rolled hot down her cheek. He brushed it away with his thumb, his touch reverent. "I got your message," she said, her voice cracking. "The photograph, the rose, in the yard." "I kept my promise," and he replied, his gaze intense. "I planted flowers." He held her gaze for a long moment. His heart, which he thought had been hardened by concrete and solitude, felt like it was breaking open. He had rehearsed this moment 1,095 days in his mind. He slowly let go of her hand, and to her shock, he knelt. He did not kneel like a boss demanding fealty. He knelt like a penitent at an altar, on the worn, pollen-dusted floor of her shop. He had no ring. He had no empire. He was a pardoned felon, with a name that was still a curse to most of the world. He reached not into his pocket, but to the copper bucket of white roses by the counter. The same one from that first night. He pulled one out, the stem perfect, its thorns sharp and intact. He held it out to her, his hand, scarred and steady, offering her the only thing he had left. "Isabella Rowan," he said, his voice raw with the gravity of the years. "I have nothing, the money, the cars, the penthouse. It's all gone. Seized by the government. I have no power to offer you. I don't even have a name that isn't stained with my father's sins." He looked up at her, his vulnerability, his only truth. "I have nothing to promise you except myself, this man, the one who's left. But if you still believe in white roses..." She was crying freely now, silent tears of release, of an impossible, agonizing joy. She wasn't just crying for him, she was crying for herself, for the lonely nights, for the blind faith she had refused to let die. She smiled, a watery, brilliant smile that broke through the tears, the first true, unguarded smile he had ever seen from her. "I never stopped believing," she whispered. She knelt in front of him on the dusty floor and took the single rose from his hand. He surged forward, not in violence, but in need. His hands came up to frame her face, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, bloody kiss on the fire escape. It was not the frantic, fevered kiss in the apartment. This kiss was a homecoming. It was gentle, a soft press of lips that spoke of reverence and awe. It was deep, a silent communication of two souls that had been torn apart and had finally found their way back. It was complete, a seal on the past and a promise for a future. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, holding him tightly, breathing him in, assuring herself that he was solid. He held her as if she were made of glass, the man who had torn down the world now holding his. They kissed, surrounded by the scent of 1,000 white flowers, the only two people in the universe. When they finally broke apart, they just held each other, foreheads resting together, breathing the same air. Outside the shop window, the world had gone quiet. The first soft flakes of snow began to fall, drifting past the glass, pure and silent. It was the first snow of the season. This time it was not mixed with blood. 7 years. The Chicago skyline was a distant watercolor, a memory of a life that belonged to someone else. The seasons had turned, grinding down the sharp edges of the past. The Valerio Empire, built on steel and secrets, was a footnote in the city's violent history. The Orpheus Network, a global tumor, was gone, excised by the testimony of the one man who knew its heart. The White Petal was no longer a single, struggling shop glowing in the rain. It was a concept. It was the White Petal Foundation. Its branches stretched across the United States, from the recovering neighborhoods of Detroit to the sun-baked avenues of New Orleans. They were not centers of profit. They were centers of remembrance. The foundation's charter was simple. They delivered flowers to the forgotten. They sent bright sprays of freesia to orphanages on the first day of school. They delivered pots of quiet, strong gardenias to women's shelters. Their largest, standing order, one that Isabella still oversaw personally, was the delivery of a single, perfect flower to reformed prisoners on the day of their release, a reminder of the life waiting for them on the outside. Dante and Isabella did not live in the city. The penthouse, seized and auctioned, was a relic. They lived in a small, white-paneled house in the suburbs, with a wide porch and a yard that was, against all odds, thriving. Life was quiet. It was the quiet Dante had only ever experienced in the moments before a storm. But this quiet was different. It was the peace of arrival. He had redeemed his name by rebuilding it. He worked for a charitable organization that helped ex-convicts re-enter the world. He was a counselor, a man who met others at the crossroads he had once faced. He taught them carpentry, helped them find steady work, and, most importantly, he listened. He, who had been raised in a world of violent silence, now made his living by hearing the confessions of others. He had taken the blood in his ledger and washed it clean with action. Their house was not silent. For the past 2 years, it had been filled with the small, tentative sounds of a new life. They had adopted a daughter, a girl named Mia, who was 6 years old when she came to them. She was a ghost, a survivor of the very world they had escaped, and her parents, caught in the meaningless crossfire of a low-level turf war, had left her an orphan of the Mafia. She had been silent for 6 months, her eyes wide, haunted by the things she had seen. But the quiet house, the scent of flowers, and the steady, patient love of 2 people who understood darkness had healed her. It was a Saturday in late July, the air thick and warm. Smelling of ozone and cut grass, Dante was on his knees in the front garden, his hands scarred and strong. The hands that had held a gun on a fire escape were covered in rich, dark soil. He was tending the roses. The entire front walk, the porch railing, the borders of the yard, they were overflowing with them. But there was no variety. There was no red for passion, no yellow for friendship. There were only white roses, hundreds of them blooming with a defiant purity in the summer heat. Mia, now 8 and no longer silent, sat on the porch steps, her dark hair in a ponytail, drawing in a sketchbook. "Papa," she asked, not looking up from her work. Dante paused, sitting back on his heels. He wiped the sweat from his brow with his forearm, leaving a streak of mud. "Yes, little bird." At school, Jessica's mom has red roses, and Mr. Henderson has pink ones. They're pretty. She pointed with her green crayon. "Why do we only grow white?" Dante looked at the flower in his hand, a perfect, half-open bud. He smiled, a slow, genuine expression that had taken him years to learn. Isabella stepped onto the porch, carrying a tray with 3 glasses of lemonade. She stopped, her hand on the white railing, and listened. She watched the 2 people who constituted her entire world. Dante gestured for Mia to come closer. She hopped off the step and sat cross-legged in the grass beside him, her bright, curious eyes fixed on his face. He touched the petal of a fully bloomed rose. "We grow white," he said, his voice the low, gentle rumble she had fallen in love with in the shop, "because they remind me of something." "What?" "They remind us," Dante said, his gaze lifting, finding Isabella's, a silent conversation passing between them that spanned a decade, that even in the darkest, scariest places, even when you think everything is lost, there is always something pure left. There is always something that isn't stained with blood. Mia tilted her head, considering this. "Like snow?" she asked. He laughed, a sound that was still new, still precious. "Exactly like snow. But this is the snow we get to keep, even in the summer." She smiled, satisfied with the answer, and handed him her drawing. It was a picture of the house, a green lawn and 3 stick figures, and all around them, dozens of white scribbles. Isabella walked down and sat on the step. Handing him a glass, he took it, his dirty hand brushing hers, their fingers interlocking. He leaned his head against her knee, a simple, domestic gesture of peace that was more profound than any vow. The camera of the mind pulls back. It moves away from the man, the woman, and the child. It rises above the small white house, above the yard defined not by fences, but by flowers. It moves higher, revealing the quiet suburban street, the town, and in the far, hazy distance, the towering, forgotten skyline of the city. But the focus remains on the small house, on the hillside covered in white roses, catching the bright morning sun like a constellation of stars, a testament to a love that had found its way out of the dark. Isabella's voice is heard, warm, steady, and full of the peace they had earned. Sometimes, love comes from old sins, but if we dare to love, dare to forgive, even a mafia can bloom. The image fades to black. On the screen, a simple logo appears, the White Petal Foundation. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below to share your thoughts and say hello. Please subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, and give this video a like. And if you enjoyed this story, please support us by hitting the hype button so this video can be heard by more people.